Wally Shoup, musician.
Wally, we are here at the 2010 Improvisor Festival to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Improvisor, which is better known as America's very own international journal of free improvisation. And I was wondering if you could tell me what free improvisation is. Maybe as a musical exercise or as a genre, what it means to you personally.
Well, it's for me. It's a music that began in the or when I first got exposed to it was in the late '60s, early '70s. A kind of I had been listening or exposed to free jazz, which was American, pretty much African American, post Ornette Coleman expansion of the idea of what jazz could be. And then somewhere around that time, I heard some improvisation coming out of Europe, specifically England, where it didn't sound jazz based anymore, but it was still obvious. It was all improvised, and it was sort of furthering, expanding the idea of what improvised music could be, not just limited to drums, saxes, and basses and whatever. It could be a lot of different things. And at that time in my life, I was wide open to sound, and anything was permissible as far as I was concerned. And when I heard this, I went, wow, this is just really, this is music that really, almost like abstract art was. It was mysterious to me, but very fascinating. And I wanted to know more about it, and so I just kept my ears out for records and things by people that were calling themselves free improvisers, and eventually started freely improvising myself as a musician. So to me it's very important. It was kind of like how I got into playing music, basically. I didn't have a background in genre music, rock or whatever, and then went into free improvising. I pretty much started as a free improviser after being exposed to hearing this stuff on records. And then, don't want to get too long-winded about this, around 78, I had a radio show, and I was sending out form letters to people who were putting out independent records at that time, which was sort of unusual. It was a new thing, because there was a distribution center out of New York that had a catalog of all these people that were putting out records on their own that didn't have to go through a label or get approved by a label. They said, hey, we got some music, let's put it out. So I wrote a bunch of people, and I got a letter back from a guy in Alabama. At the time I was living in Colorado Springs, and sent me 2 records. Nice, funny little letter, and I put them on, and they were just marvelous. They were free improvisation, but with a southern slant. And since I'm originally from the South, I could hear it immediately, and I was like, wow, this is fantastic. So that was kind of also another thing that pulled me into free improvisation, was hearing people of somewhat similar backgrounds to me musically, probably coming from a lot of the same spaces: blues, rock and roll, soul, and then finding their way into free improvisation. And I kind of wanted to meet them and figure out what they were up to, and so I did.
Who were those people?
Those people were Davey Williams and LaDonna Smith. And there were a couple others, but those were the 2 main people. So one of the nice little stories around this was, in Colorado Springs, I was so intrigued by the music that I wanted to ask him. I wrote him back and said, are you ever touring? And because I can book a gig for you in Colorado Springs. And because there was a little free improv scene that I was part of. It wasn't quite as evolved as I could tell their scene was, but I knew how to get gigs and how to get people to present the music, and where to present it. And so they said sure. So I set up a gig, and somewhere around that time I had this opportunity to move to LA, and so I took it. So I moved out to LA, and one of the first gigs I went to was at this little place called the Century City Playhouse that was putting on weekly shows of experimental music. And lo and behold, They were presenting Davey Williams and LaDonna Smith. So, and Ted Bowen, a bass player at the time. And so I went to the gig. It was fantastic. They were just marvelous. I had never seen anything quite like it. Fast, quirky, really telepathic, intuitive music making that it had no reference points really to, oh, that's jazz or that's blues, you know. It was just music in its own world, and it was fantastic. Watching them play, very humorous. They dedicated one of the pieces to Tex Ritter. And so I got to meet him, and I said, "Hey, I'm Wally Shoup," and they went, "Wally Shoup, you're putting on a gig for us in Colorado." I said, "No, I'm sorry, man, that gig's canceled. I'm here in LA." "Oh, okay." So I said, "But let's get together." And sure enough, we got together the next day at some beach south of LA with Ted and Sue, his wife, and we hung out on the beach, got to know each other, found out we had a lot of common interests. Hampton Grease Band, all these southern weird bands, and I just thought this was so marvelous because I had been away from the South for 10 years and had a little bit of a yearning to come back. And so I'm meeting Davey Williams and LaDonna Smith, whose music I just was completely blown away by, on some little beach south of LA, talking about southern weird music. I thought, okay, good. I'm going to eventually have to figure out how to work with these folks or move back south or something, because I was really, my own music interest had really moved toward free improv, and these people just, I felt like, wow, they can really show me a lot.
Wow. Well, you just talked about Davey, and when you first met him. What was your first impression of him? Just kind of as a person, or did you? You may not even be able to remember the actual meeting itself, but maybe just your feeling for him.
Well, his letter. First of all, I met him through his letter, and his letter was funny, and it was kind of had a kind of droll, kind of witty sense of humor that I sort of recognized as Southern humor. It's kind of getting a message from a Southerner, even though I wasn't in the South anymore. And in watching them play, you know, it was just very inventive, using a guitar in a lot of new ways, very quick and very, very responsive. Like I said before, telepathic. And listening to that music on record, I'd heard it on record with them and maybe Music Improvisation Company, Derek Bailey, these folks. Watching it and seeing how it just got created with these three people magically doing this was just very, very inspiring, and also kind of caused my imagination to kind of just go off in a lot of different zones, not just musically, but into a lot of other areas. Some visual, some like literary narratives that you could imagine this being soundtrack music to. All sorts of things. Just kind of, it was freeing, liberating, and at the same time it was music making. I mean, they were up there working and listening, and a lot of facility, a lot of really great attention to pitch, where the pitches were, tone, densities, movement, space, just music making is kind of most essential, you know, just down to the basics, but advanced at the same time. You know? So I had a good impression, let me put it that way.
Well, you know, Davey is considered one of the three founding fathers of American free improvisation guitar. And you had mentioned, I've read before, do you think he's one of the most underrated guitarists in general? I don't know if that's right. I've read that online.
Well, I have to think about that. Give me the rest of your question.
Okay. But I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about his guitar style, and as specifically as a guitarist, because he is kind of one of the most under-recognized guitar players, but definitely one of the most inventive. And with the roots he has in blues music and R&B, and to kind of come from that and to take the guitar out, take the blues out. I don't know if you could comment a little about his style, the characteristics,
sure.
what he brings to the guitar.
Well, when I finally moved down here in '81 and had a chance to be around him and LaDonna and everyone else for a while, and we played on a very regular basis, and I was able to kind of just be around Davey's playing a lot, and because I'd already admired it from afar, and I could hear, you could hear the blues references, and you could hear, obviously, you could hear, in a loose sense of the word, psychedelic. Through the late 60s, with Hendrix, the guitar had become more like, it was okay for it to be a sound source and not just a note source. And in Davey's playing, and Derek Bailey, of course, had liberated it to a certain degree even more from even being something that you make continuous music on. You could disrupt it, discontinuity, flintiness, a lot of these things became part of the language. But with Davey, I could hear a kind of all those things. And then because I was able to see that they were influenced by surrealism, that he was able to use his imagination to think of the guitar as something other than this music instrument, or an instrument that you play music on, that it could be a medium for unknown worlds, and this instrument could be, unknown sounds could come through this instrument if you use it correctly, or in a certain mindset. And so he was one of the first people I ever saw that used objects on his guitar, and I realized after a while they weren't arbitrary objects. They were kind of like magic objects, or objects that meant something to him. It wasn't just any stone. It'd be a stone that had some specific meaning for him. So when he used that stone, it wasn't just a stone on the guitar. The stone was something that allowed energies to come through sonically, that took you someplace that stone and that meeting of the stone and the guitar could take you. And would take him too. You could tell to a certain degree he's playing it, but it's playing him. And then of course some of it's humorous with the egg beaters, later with the baseball glove and stuff, or the spaghetti dish. They're all mediums. It's not just a joke, and it's not just a visual pun, even though it is that. So it's kind of a reimagining of what the guitar could be, with a guy that already had a lot of dexterity, speed, pitch understanding, chord understanding, and the blues. And as Davey, one thing I always remember about Davey saying about the blues, because for people that might think the blues are quaint, oh wow, the blues, his attitude, no, the blues should sound like a cocked gun, meaning the blues have an edge to them, because the blues that he grew up playing with in southern Alabama, I'm sure those scenes and those people that played blues, they were no wimps, in any sense of the word. And there was always an edginess in there. There's a sexuality, and there's an edgy sexuality, not just I'm hurt because my baby left me, but there's more going on there. And to hear that or make that part of the music expression is really high-level blues. Davey brought that into his playing, but that's just only an adjunct of his playing, because his playing is much more like, to a certain degree to me, it's reality-based, but it's surreality-based too. It's imagination-based and reality-based. Blues is kind of reality-based, real reality-based when you think about it, not only formally, but the subject matter, the sound of it. But he took this surrealist imagination, artistic imagination, and just liberated it. And then to the point of the surrealism, there's another quote, of course, by Breton, that beauty must be convulsive or not at all. And I heard that completely in Davey's music. It was beautiful music, but there were times, and some of the times I like the most as a player too, is where it just really feels like it's almost ready to completely come apart, But it doesn't come apart, and it's a real beauty there. And it takes a lot of control, but a lot of letting go of control too to get to that place. And Davey definitely kind of has that in spades, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny you should mention Breton and that quote, because it's actually a very important quote, kind of in understanding, I think, Davey and his style and his sensibilities, because he often calls his style convulsive blues as a reference to Breton, and that combination of the real and the surreal, and it's definitely all part of a whole. There's not a separation. It is together,
right.
which is remarkable. And so that leads me to two questions. One, so he played with Johnny Shines as a 19-year-old kid out of Eutaw, Alabama, EUTAW. And Johnny, much like Davey, is kind of one of the unheralded giants of the blues genre.
True.
I mean, he played with Wolf, studied under Wolf, Son House, traveled more with Robert Johnson than any other player of the time, and became a big player both the Delta scene and the Chicago blues scene. And for a young guy from rural Alabama to have tapped into this rich cultural history and to be invited into the wing of a man like Johnny Shines is pretty incredible. I was wondering, if you could talk about that, and did people know about this aspect of his playing? It's something that's not widely known by everyone. A lot of musicians seem to know about it, and what that meant to Davey as maybe a kid growing up, if you could provide any insight or have any insight into that.
Well, I can't really speak necessarily to his experiences with Johnny Shines, except what he's told me. And sure, it was remarkable. But I can kind of tell a little story around that. He's from Eutaw, Alabama, right? Okay. They have the Eutaw Blues Festival once a year. And we went down a couple times. And it's, I don't know what it is now, but maybe it's more, who knows by now. But when we went down maybe 20 years ago, it was just this little small, real deal festival on the courthouse steps, which Davey was always mentioned, 20 years before, a black wouldn't have been able to stand on the courthouse. They had their own festival right there. Very indigenous black. Almost every performer was black. I'd say the audience was 98% black, and the 2% were probably people that were blues aficionados or something, from Chicago to come to the real blues festivals. And every act was black, except they invited Davey up to play. And he hadn't played there in a long time, I don't think. Probably hadn't played in a while in Eutaw or whatever on the festival. But just sat right in, and immediately you could just tell this language, their language, this kind of country blues, black, rural South blues language, which was still a living language down there too. Even though this was kind of a festival, it felt a little bit like a museum thing. At the same time, you could tell probably on Saturday nights on our front porch, out in rural Alabama, where there weren't any white people, this is music they might have been playing, But Davey immediately, all this big black, I can't remember his name, Davey would know. He was kind of he was the guy in charge, or if he wasn't in charge, he was going to make sure you thought he was. And he kept calling Davey, hey, come on up here, redneck. But he was said with affection, come on up here, redneck. We got this redneck up here. And he knew Davey was. And then Davey got a slide. They started something up, and Davey started playing. And it was just like, he didn't go too far out on it. He took it out a little bit from the standard blues. Just a little bit. Just enough to get a little nod of the head, a couple guys on stage. And you could tell they loved it because they knew that he knew the language. He wasn't up there faking it. He grew up with it. Now, whether they knew he played with Johnny or not, I don't know. And it didn't seem to matter. They just knew right away this guy knew the language and was good enough to mess with it a little bit and still make it work. Because he was, like I said, he wasn't going into full-blown Davey Williams Convulsive Blues land, but he was pushing a little bit on a couple of fills and stuff, and it just made me aware, like, this guy, this is part of his heritage, and I'm sure, I know, he really appreciates how good these people are at making that kind of music. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it may seem like folky, but there's an edge to it, and it's there, but it's underneath. It's underneath, and if it's not underneath, they would know. They would know. It would be lacking in that depth that would come from having grown up with this music, So, as far as his experience with Johnny, they sound like great experiences, and it must have been something else. And I do know the Europeans, when they first went to Europe, because I've talked to some Europeans, were really fascinated, probably more than Americans, that these two people making somewhat European free improv, or influenced by European free improv. One of the guys that played with Johnny Shines, you can you can better believe that really was like, whoa. And whenever they'd come here, and quite a few Europeans would come here that they would meet in Europe and come to Birmingham and play, they'd set up a gig and dig the August 99-degree ambience. We're always fascinated and very, very inquisitive about that part of Davey's background, the blues, because that's very unusual, you know what I mean, for somebody to be playing that music, this sort of free-form, abstract out music, to have this grounded blues background. But you can hear it, if you listen at all, it runs through his music completely, but then there's all these other sort of more modernist, whatever, more imaginative areas of music that come in and influence what he does. And to me, since I like blues music anyway, I mean, it's some of the best music on the planet, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's a very unique kind of history he's placed himself in, with one foot in this root of American music and another one in this, modern or postmodern sort of genre or musical exercise, but however you like to define it. Very, very unique in that way. I would like to maybe move on to something you mentioned earlier, but is tied into this same idea about his sensibility, is his interest in surrealism and LaDonna's interest in surrealism and Dada, and how that influenced their playing styles, their sense of theatricality, their sense of the absurd, and just in general how it influenced them intellectually. And I don't know if you can comment on that or provide any.
Well, I can definitely comment on the. Well, I can comment. Yeah, I can. There's several elements of it. Musically, see, I had gotten into free improv in the '70s through my own methodology, whatever it was. And when I first met them and got to know where they were coming from, I had no particular knowledge or even idea that surrealism was informing their music. But as I got to know them, and I realized that part of some of the games that surrealists play, one is called, it's automatic writing, automatic drawing, which sort of the goal of which is not to have necessarily any kind of like idea in mind of where it's going to take you to start doing it. Let the subconscious sort of get the upper hand if you can, and just follow it. And they saw improvisation or free improvisation, how they heard it. I mean, the European stuff, because they were influenced by it. They heard it as a form of automatic music, in the same idea of automatic writing or automatic painting, that this is music made automatically without preconception, with the hope that the unconscious will eventually take over and kind of like allow that to start having its way musically. And then of course when I lived with them, I found, and I got involved with, I'm an artist, but I wouldn't call myself a surrealist, although I've been influenced by people that the surrealists embrace to a certain degree. I'm not a card-carrying surrealist, but since I lived there, we did a lot of automatic paintings and automatic. I got to do some of the stuff, corpse kind of writing, a lot of collaborative paintings, and the improvisation music fit right into there. And then eventually, this marvelous thing happened in Birmingham, where dancers, painters, musicians, poets would get together on a Saturday night, and we'd all start improvising. And at the end of the night, you'd either have a bunch of pieces of art, you'd have a great time, but it became kind of a way of thinking about doing a lot of things, not just making music, not just improvising music, but kind of improvising as a kind of an activity, a life activity that was a bit surrealist, and also just encouraging what you might call spontaneous creativity, just kind of calling that forth, not putting any limits or too big of boundaries on it. Hopefully nobody's instrument got destroyed or whatever. That could happen if somebody got too boisterous with on the conga or something. But just let that go and see where it took you. And everybody was into that idea. And it was really a great period because it was very creative. And it wasn't necessarily this feeling that we had to put a name on it, or that we had to later take out the good parts and choreograph that. It was just like, no, let's just do this. And it was an aspect of it was kind of applying improvised music principles, responsiveness, attention to what's going on around you, a kind of free-form imagination. It just allowed a lot of stuff to happen. And that to me was, I don't know if they would have considered all those surrealist or improvised. I mean, I'm not sure what name you could put on it, but it was kind of coming out of the same mindset, that things could happen automatically, and it was, you didn't have to be judgmental about doing it as, oh, is this any good? Is this not any good? No, that thought's out the window. You just are doing it, you know. And then as you do that, and as you collaborate with people, you just get kind of, if not better at it, you get more comfortable with allowing it to go where it wants to take you. And that's sort of the goal in the way of playing improvised music in general, I think. So I got a lot of that from them as a aspect of surrealism.
Fantastic. Yeah. Was your time here in Birmingham, was it an important time for you musically and creatively? You speak rather fondly about your time spent here, and you were involved with the Improvisor and were writing reviews for that, which again we were here celebrating. Was it a fruitful period? Was it a bountiful period?
Oh, it was great. Yeah, it was. Looking back at it now, it was sort of the springboard for me to, because I was a little bit of a late bloomer as an active participant, as an active musician and artist. I'd always been interested as a listener and a viewer and a thoughtful person about these art forms. But I had a lot of trepidation about actually doing it for a lot of reasons. Maybe having to do with the wrong kind of schooling or something. I mean, the idea that I wasn't an artist, that can get implanted in your head early on. And if you think you're not an artist or you're not a musician, well, guess what? You don't do any art or music. And but eventually I overcame that resistance and jumped into the pool. And I jumped in a little late, you know, for a musician anyway, pretty late, you know. But philosophically I wasn't late, but technically and knowledge-wise, music, etc. So I needed, and I was in Colorado Springs at the time, and I was kind of getting my feet wet. And when I saw them, like in LA in '78, and I just heard it, and then I realized, well, I'm on the same wavelength with these folks too. Southerners, like weird music, you know, and so I moved to Birmingham consciously to, I call it going to the school of Davey and LaDonna as an improviser, because I wanted to get better as an improviser, and I wanted to be around people who, A, didn't really know me, didn't know that I wasn't an artist. You know, they just accepted me as an artist. When I first came down here, it was like, oh, Wally, good to see you, man. Let's make some music. It wasn't like, oh, Wally, you think you're a musician? Or something. It was none of that. There was no baggage. So I just jumped in, and for 4 or 5 years with this community down here, which just was flat out amazing. Because not just Davey and LaDonna, who were flat out amazing, but dancers, a number of dancers were just amazing dancers, other musicians. It was just this period where it was very fertile, a lot going on in this community. And basically what I got was confidence that a lot of the things I thought that were meaningful and valuable in music were in fact meaningful and valuable in music. And they weren't about commerciality or any of that. It's about getting to your own art center, your own creative center, and trusting it with other people. And once you get there, good things happen. And so learning that firsthand by doing a lot. We were talking about this the other night. There's a woman in town right now, Juanita Suarez, amazing dancer. She was part of it. And we were talking about, partially it was a small townness, or if not small town, remoteness. Because there'd be many times in Birmingham on a Friday night, it's hot, there's nothing really going on in town you want to do, and you really thought about it. And you'd get together with these improvisers, either at somebody's house or at the dance studio, and improvise all night. Now you might interrupt it, with listening to music or doing something else, but you take breaks. But it was just part of an activity, a creative activity that was just very, very fertile and lively, and not worried. No one was worried about whether this was going to make it on New York or any of that. It was just, hey, man, it was fun, but it was also like I look at it as a laboratory in learning how to deal creatively with unpredictable situations. In fact, the unpredictable situations were, welcomed. Because when they would happen, you learn to deal with them in a creative way instead of that being kind of uh-oh, something's wrong here. It's no, this is good. That's a nice mindset as a creative person to get into. So yeah, for me, I kind of became an artist down here. And so when I left, I really felt like I could probably go maybe to, ended up going to Seattle, maybe a larger community than Birmingham's, but I had a real sense of who I was, what I was about, and what I wanted to do. And I got that in Birmingham in that period. So that's invaluable to me because it stayed with me and it's going to stay with me. And being down here for this anniversary is just another reminder when I see these folks, because some of us are far flung now, not everybody lives here anymore, that a lot of this has stuck with us. A lot of people that are back down here for this are still in the creative world in a very, I think in a very laudable way, for the right reasons, I think. And I know a lot of it comes out of that period where it wasn't just a gestation, it was a maturity at the same time. Because these were, Davey and LaDonna, all of us were fairly mature artists, but we were playing and it was playful. And out of that, you kind of evolved your own language that you could take somewhere else and work with other people. So certainly, yeah, Birmingham, 81, I was here 81, 85, incredibly valuable period for not only me, but everybody that was here.
Here you are at the 2010 Improvisor Festival, revisiting these old alliances, playing again with some of these people. What is it like to come back?
Well, it's great. But I was telling somebody maybe the only thing that would actually bring me back to Birmingham in the middle of August would be a chance to play with Davey again and see LaDonna. But now I'm down here, I realize there's lots of other people that I haven't seen in a while. And like I said, some are here for the festival. Doug Carroll, there's quite a few, Juanita. Just great to see them again. I wasn't necessarily expecting to see them. I mean, I was definitely expect to see Davey and LaDonna. And so yeah, it's a reaffirmation, as I mentioned earlier, of the value and the longevity of the ideas we were working on, all of us together. Aesthetically, philosophically, artistically, were solid. I mean, they weren't shallow, because we're still all working on them. And we're still continuing to grow, I think. So coming back is good for me. I think it's good for them. And then to see that this interest in improvisation in Birmingham, Alabama, has not really abated. I mean, it's still a town where this goes on. There's an interest. There's people. I mean, of course, LaDonna, is the general dynamo that gets it done. But more people, she's been, spread the word. People that can see a value in improvisation do, and there's still an interest in it, and you can tell it's still kind of as much as it was when I was here. It's still definitely something that's looked at as a very valuable thing, which it is.
Wonderful. And this is the last question I have for you, but there's going to be a small question after this follows. But I was wondering if you taught Davey's sense of humor so important to his music and his art, and something he's recognized for. And I was just wondering if you could comment on it. Where it comes from, if it's uniquely Southern, as you say. But it's such an important part of kind of who he is. Like at lunch today, some of the stories he was telling and whatnot. I was wondering if you could just comment on that a little bit.
Well, let's see. Anybody that's been around Davey for longer than a minute is going to end up laughing somehow, some way. So I can't. If I could describe his humor, I would do it, man. But no. The gal I live with, Shirley, is saying, Davey's the one guy, I'm not one of these guys, I got a sense of humor, and I like to laugh, but I'm not a laugh out loud guy a lot, But when I'm around Davey, man, he gets me laughing out loud. Yeah, a lot of it's Southern, but it's his Southern way, And there's a kind of unexpected little detours he'll take you on in one of his stories, Like one of his ones I always like, because there's always a cliche at the end of improv gigs of like, hey, hey, we're going to do one more piece for you. And usually, of course, at the end of 45 minutes, particularly if the audience isn't crazy about the music or whatever, it's like, oh, good, it's going to be a short one or something. And Davey always will go, we've been doing one more for you. It's going to only be like 3 hours. Or the way he would do it would be like, it's only going to be 3 hours. Stuff like that, and it's like droll and but funny, and so yeah, his humor, it comes through in his music and his art. But those of us that have been fortunate enough to spend some quality time with Dave, he just lightens it up for all of us. His humor is my humor. If I had Davey's way with humor, I'd be like, wow. So, but there's no like, there's no comic competition or anything going on, because he's in a class of his own, man. That's all I can say. And you can see in his writings. Fortunately, it's in his writings, and it's in his artwork, and it crops up in his music, almost like it does in conversation. It's not like he's just going to go off on this comedic thing. It's going to be doing something. And the next thing you know, something comes along. Whoa, he just threw something by me, that was funny, And some of it's, he can do things where he's talking with the guitar. Of course, some of his objects, are funny, that might get used in a funny way. But it's always at the service. This is the thing about Davey. Even in the conversational humor, it's always at the service of keeping this thing going that is very creative and very engaging. And you feel like you want to go with it. He has a way of like making you want to go with it, even though it's going to take you out a ways. It's okay, because Davey's intentions are benevolent, and so you're happy to go there wherever he goes. So yeah, it's a big part of Davey, and I've never talked to anyone that hasn't commented on it. But I will say this, yeah, there's a southernness to it, but it's a kind of Southern humor that non-Southerners can like too. But Southerners can really appreciate it, because there's a lot of takes on Southernism going on too, So it's brilliant. He's brilliant, man.
Wonderful. One last question, and you can feel free to answer this any way you'd like. Improvise, if you will. Which came first, the fried chicken or the fried egg?
Oh man, Lee, throwing a real stumper at me. I thought it was which came first, the fried egg. Wait a minute, was it the fried chicken or the fried egg? Oh, I should know. I've read the book, because it says now the story can be told. Speaking of Davey's humor, I hope they're promoting his book. Davey's got a great book called Which Came First, the Fried Chicken. You got flute playing fried eggs, and that are getting berated by the teacher for some reason, and I don't know. I'll have to think about that and to get back to you.